Vex Prime Station buzzed with its usual collection of traders, mercenaries and various scum from across the galaxy. The air recyclers wheezed like dying animals, pushing stale oxygen through corridors that had seen better centuries. Among the crowd, a figure in battered armor drew snickers and pointed claws. The human walked with steady purpose, her helmet cracked down the middle like a broken egg. Deep gouges scarred the metal surface, each one telling a story that none of the onlookers bothered to read. To them she looked like another washed-up soldier clinging to past glories. "Look at that pathetic display," hissed Koroth, a Velkhani trader whose purple scales gleamed with prosperity. His 4 eyes tracked the humans' movement through the market. Humans and their attachment to broken things. Why not simply buy new armor? His companion, a hulking draconis named Thane, chuckled with the sound of grinding stone. Perhaps she cannot afford it. Their species lost the war, after all. Now they scramble for scraps like the rest of the defeated races. The human paused at a weapons vendor's stall, examining a plasma rifle with professional interest. Her movements were fluid, practiced. The vendor, a nervous squeaker from the outer rim, fidgeted with his tentacles. Honored customer," the squeaker chirped, "perhaps you would prefer something more, suited to your apparent financial situation. I have some older models in the back storage." Without looking up from the weapon, the human spoke. Her voice carried through the translator with crisp authority. "This power coupling is misaligned. The discharge rate would drop by 30% after sustained fire. I suggest you fix it before someone gets killed using your merchandise." The vendor's eyes widened. Few customers possessed such technical knowledge. "Ah, yes, of course. Thank you for the observation." Koroth's sneer deepened. Technical knowledge means nothing without credits to spend. She probably learned that from some training manual she found in the wreckage of her homeworld. The human continued browsing, seemingly oblivious to the commentary following her path. Her helmet turned slightly and, for a moment, the cracks caught the station's artificial light. The pattern looked almost deliberate, like battle scars worn with pride rather than shame. A group of young Caltharian warriors blocked her path, their ceremonial blades gleaming at their sides. The leader, barely out of adolescence by his species' standards, puffed out his chest. "Human," he called out loudly, ensuring maximum audience participation. "That armor belongs in a museum, or better yet, a trash compactor. You dishonor the memory of real warriors by wearing such refuse." The human stopped walking. The station's background hum seemed to quiet slightly, as if the very air held its breath. She turned to face the young Caltharian, and several onlookers noticed something odd about her posture. There was no tension, no defensive readiness, just patience. "Real warriors," she repeated thoughtfully. "And what makes a real warrior, young one?" The Caltharian's friends snickered behind him. "Victory in combat. Honor earned through strength. Not crawling through space stations in broken equipment like some refugee." Interesting perspective. The human nodded slowly. "Tell me, what battles have you won?" "I am trained in 17 forms of blade combat. I have studied the greatest military tactics of 6 different civilizations." The young warrior's voice grew louder with each word. "Studied," the human mused. "That's educational. I'm sure your instructors were very thorough." The crowd pressed closer, sensing entertainment. Koroth rubbed his hands together with anticipation. Nothing brightened a dull trading day like watching someone get humiliated. "Mock me if you dare, human filth." The Caltharian's hand moved to his blade hilt. "I challenge you to prove your worth." The human's helmet tilted slightly. Even through the cracked visor, her amusement was palpable. "It's a challenge. In the middle of a trading station. How very studied of you." "Are you afraid?" Another young Caltharian taunted. "Perhaps that cracked helmet scrambled your courage along with your brains." The laughter that followed was cut short by a new sound. Deep, resonant footsteps approaching from the upper levels. The crowd parted as a massive figure descended the central ramp. General Kethmore of the Hegemony Council stood nearly 3 meters tall, his carapace gleaming with military decorations. His compound eyes surveyed the scene with calculating intelligence. Behind him walked 2 aides-de-camp, their expressions carefully neutral. What seems to be the disturbance here? Kethmore's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. The young Caltharian straightened to attention. General, I was merely pointing out the disgraceful appearance of this human vagrant. Such broken armor dishonors all military traditions. Kethmore's gaze fixed on the human, who had not moved from her position. His eyes traced the pattern of damage across her helmet, and something shifted in his expression. Vagrant, he repeated slowly. That's an interesting assessment. He moved closer, his attention focused entirely on the helmet's scarred surface. Tell me, young warrior, do you recognize any of these markings? The Caltharian glanced at the helmet dismissively. They appear to be random battle damage, General. The chaotic result of poor tactical planning. Random. Kethmore's mandibles clicked together in what his species considered amusement. Nothing about those marks is random, you fool. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity overriding their earlier mockery. Korath strained to see what had captured the general's attention. Kethmore's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. That gouge along the left temple. That's from Vorthak Warclaws. The Vorthak Legion was considered unbeatable in close combat. He paused, letting the information sink in. They were wiped out during the Proxima campaign 15 years ago. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The Vorthak were legend. Their warriors stood 4 meters tall, with natural weapons that could slice through starship hulls. The burn mark across the crown, Kethmore continued, his voice gaining intensity. That's from Kilrathi plasma cannons. The heavy variety they mounted on their siege walkers. Another pause. The Kilrathi siege corps ceased to exist after the Battle of Kepler Station. The young Caltharian's face had gone pale. General, surely you don't mean... The impact crater near the right ear, Kethmore pressed on relentlessly, could only come from Draconis stone hammers. The ceremonial kind they awarded to champions who had killed over 100 enemies in single combat. His voice carried a note of respect now. The last Draconis champion died defending their homeworld during the Terran offensive. Silence settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. Even the station's background noise seemed muted. Each mark, Kethmore said, his eyes never leaving the helmet, represents not just a battle survived, but an entire warrior culture that no longer exists. This human didn't just fight these enemies. He straightened to his full height. She was there when they made their final stands. The human finally spoke, her voice cutting through the stunned quiet. The Vorthak were honorable opponents. Their final charge at Proxima Ridge was magnificent. Completely suicidal, but magnificent nonetheless. The Kilrathi fought to the last walker, she continued, as if discussing the weather. Their siege master refused evacuation orders, chose to die with his machines rather than live in defeat. I respected that choice, even as I was forced to stop him. Kethmore's aide-de-camp exchanged glances. One of them whispered something into his communication device. And the Draconis champion? Kethmore asked quietly. The human was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, there was something different in her voice. Sadness? Regret? Gorak Thul. He was a worthy adversary. We fought for 6 hours in the ruins of their capital city. When it was over, I carried his body to the Hall of Heroes myself. You knew his name, Kethmore observed. I know all their names, the human replied simply. Every warrior whose mark is on this helmet earned the right to be remembered. The crowd had grown completely silent. Even the merchants had stopped hawking their wares to listen. How many? Kethmore's question was barely audible. The human's helmet moved slightly as she looked down at her hands. 47 different warrior cultures. Some were small clans, others entire military castes. All extinct now, all, she paused. All because they stood in humanity's path during the war. Korath, who had been so eager to mock earlier, found his voice caught in his throat. The stories were true then, the whispered tales of human ruthlessness, their systematic dismantling of opposition during the conflict. "You were infantry?" one of the aides-de-camp asked, professional curiosity overriding diplomatic protocol. A sound emerged from the human that might have been laughter. "Infantry, special operations, ship-to-ship boarding actions, planetary assault, siege warfare, counter-insurgency." She shrugged. "Whatever needed doing." "A generalist," Kethmore mused. "A survivor," the human corrected. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if there's a difference." The young Caltharian who had started this confrontation stood frozen, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. His friends had edged away, suddenly finding other places to be. "You said you studied 17 forms of blade combat," the human addressed him directly. "That's impressive. Academic excellence should be celebrated." Her tone held no mockery, only tired patience. "But studying war and surviving it are different skills entirely." I meant no disrespect," the young warrior stammered. "Of course you did," the human replied matter-of-factly. "You saw broken armor and assumed it represented failure. That's not unreasonable. Most broken things are discarded because they're no longer useful." She tapped the cracked visor of her helmet. "But sometimes the cracks are what give something its strength." Kethmore studied her with new interest. "It's an unusual philosophy for a warrior." "I'm not a warrior anymore," the human said. "I'm just someone who survived when others didn't." "There's no honor in that, General, just responsibility." Responsibility? To remember, to carry their stories forward, to make sure their sacrifices meant something, even in defeat. The human gestured at her scarred helmet. "This isn't a trophy collection, it's a memorial." The crowd began to disperse slowly, the entertainment value of the encounter having transformed into something uncomfortable. Korath slithered away without another word, his earlier superiority replaced by something that might have been shame. The young Caltharian lingered, uncertainty written across his features. "Human, what was it like? The war, I mean." The human considered the question for a long moment. "Necessary, terrible, efficient." She paused. "Everything a war should be, and nothing it should have to be." "Do you regret it?" "Every day." The response came without hesitation. "But regret doesn't change what happened. It just reminds you to do better next time." "Will there be a next time?" The human's helmet turned toward the stars visible through the station's viewing ports. "There's always a next time. The only variable is who's doing the fighting and who's doing the dying." Kethmore approached closer, his military bearing softening slightly. "If I may ask, what brings you to Vex Prime? This isn't exactly a destination for retired soldiers." "Retired." The human seemed to taste the word. "I suppose that's accurate." "I'm looking for someone, actually. A contact who might have information about surviving members of the Ultaran Void Rangers." The general's expression shifted to surprise. "The Void Rangers were eliminated during the siege of their fortress moon. That's documented historical fact." "Documented, yes, but I have reason to believe a small group escaped the final battle. If they're still alive, they deserve to know that their sacrifice wasn't forgotten. You're hunting survivors of your own enemies." "I'm fulfilling a promise," the human corrected. "The Ranger commander asked me to carry word to any survivors before he died. Took me 15 years to track down leads that brought me here." Kethmore's aide whispered something urgent in his ear. The general's compound eyes widened slightly. "What did your aide just tell you?" the human asked, her posture subtly shifting. "Intelligence reports suggest that several Alteran survivors have been spotted in this sector," Kethmore admitted reluctantly. "They're wanted for war crimes by the Hegemony Council." The human's stance didn't change, but the air around her seemed to grow colder. "War crimes. That's an interesting charge to level against people whose entire civilization was exterminated. They've been conducting raids against shipping lanes, civilian targets. Desperate people do desperate things, the human observed. Survival can make anyone seem criminal to those comfortable enough to judge. The tension in the area ratcheted up several notches. Other station occupants began giving their group a wider berth. "Are you planning to interfere with lawful apprehension of these fugitives?" Kethmore asked, his voice taking on official tones. The human was quiet for several heartbeats. When she finally spoke, her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "General, I made a promise to a dying enemy who showed more honor in his final moments than most beings manage in their entire lives." She met his compound gaze directly. "I intend to keep that promise, even if it means conflict with hegemony forces." Especially then. The standoff stretched between them, two military minds calculating odds, advantages, potential outcomes. Around them, the station continued its business, but the immediate area had cleared completely. Finally, Kethmore spoke. "You realize I could have you detained simply for expressing intent to obstruct justice." "You could try," the human agreed amiably. "But we both know how that would end. Do we?" The human's helmet tilted slightly, and for just a moment the cracks in her visor seemed to glow with reflected light. "General, my armor bears the marks of 47 extinct warrior cultures. Do you really want yours to be the 48th? The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Kethmore's mandibles clicked in rapid calculation, weighing decades of military experience against the reputation standing before him. His aide-de-camp had stepped back, hands moving instinctively toward their sidearms. "Stand down," Kethmore ordered his subordinates without breaking eye contact with the human. "This conversation isn't over, but it doesn't need to end in bloodshed." "Wise choice," the human acknowledged, "though I suspect we'll dance this dance again before my business here is finished." The general's compound eyes narrowed. "What makes you so certain these Alturan survivors are worth protecting?" "They lost their war. Their civilization is dust. What could they possibly offer that justifies risking conflict with the hegemony?" "Hope," the human replied without hesitation, "something in short supply these days." A commotion near the station's docking bays interrupted their philosophical debate. Alarms began wailing, and security forces rushed past their position. The human's head snapped toward the disturbance with predatory alertness. "Speak of the devils," she muttered, already moving toward the chaos. Kethmore signaled his aides to follow as they pursued the human through the crowded corridors. The station's speakers crackled to life with emergency announcements. "All civilians report to emergency shelters immediately. Security teams to Docking Bay 7. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." They arrived at the bay's observation deck to find pure mayhem below. Three figures in sleek, dark armor had somehow breached the station's defenses and were systematically dismantling security forces with surgical precision. Their movements flowed like liquid death, each motion economical and devastatingly effective. "Alturan Void Rangers," Kethmore breathed, recognizing the distinctive fighting style from old war footage. "But that's impossible. Our intelligence said there were maybe a dozen survivors scattered across the outer rim." The human studied the battle below with professional interest. "Intelligence has a habit of being wrong when it comes to people who've spent 15 years learning how to stay invisible." One of the rangers below broke from combat to hack into a nearby data terminal. The others formed a protective perimeter, their weapons tracking multiple targets simultaneously. Even outnumbered 20 to 1, they maintained absolute control of the engagement zone. "They're after something specific," the human observed. "This isn't random piracy." The hegemony prisoner transfer manifest, one of Kethmore's aides supplied, consulting his datapad. "We're holding captured Alturan civilians in the detention center, scheduled for transport to the work camps tomorrow." The human's posture shifted subtly, and suddenly the air felt electric with barely contained violence. "Civilians, collaborators and insurgent sympathizers," Kethmore corrected. Due process was followed. Due process. The human's voice carried enough ice to freeze plasma. "How many?" 17 individuals, mostly elderly and children who were providing aid to fugitive rangers. The human was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. When she spoke again, her tone had become conversational, which somehow made it infinitely more terrifying. "General, in approximately 4 minutes, those rangers down there are going to breach the detention center. They'll extract their people and attempt to escape through the secondary launch tubes. You seem very certain of their tactical approach. I trained them." The admission hit like a physical blow. Kethmore's aide-de-camps exchanged horrified glances. During the war, the human continued matter-of-factly. The Alteran military requested cross-training programs with human special forces. This cultural exchange initiative. I spent 6 months teaching their Void Rangers advanced infiltration techniques. You taught your enemies how to fight you. I taught fellow soldiers how to survive impossible odds. There's a difference. The human watched as one of the rangers below executed a perfect breach maneuver she'd demonstrated years ago. Explosions echoed from deeper within the station as the rangers advanced toward their objective. Security forces were regrouping, but their movements looked clumsy compared to the fluid precision of their opponents. "They're going to succeed," Kethmore realized with growing alarm. "My security forces aren't trained for this level of opposition." "No," the human agreed. "They're not. You could stop them." The human turned to face him directly, and through the cracked visor of her helmet, her eyes were visible for the first time. They held depths that spoke of too many battles, too many necessary choices, too much survival. "Could I? Yes, will I?" she shrugged. "That depends on what you're willing to offer. This is blackmail. This is negotiation. There's a subtle but important distinction. Or explosions, closer now. The Rangers had breached the detention center's outer defenses. Through the security feeds they could see armored figures moving with lethal efficiency through corridors designed to be impregnable. "What do you want?" Kethmore demanded. "Safe passage for the Rangers and their rescued civilians, transport off station without pursuit, and a guarantee that the hegemony will stop hunting the remaining Alteran survivors." "That's impossible. I don't have authority to make those kinds of agreements." "Then find someone who does. You have approximately 90 seconds before they reach the prisoners." Kethmore's mind raced through possibilities. His political career would be destroyed if he allowed this breach to succeed. But the alternative? "If I refuse?" The human gestured toward the battle below. "Then you'll have front row seats to watch 3 of the galaxy's most effective soldiers demonstrate why their species lasted as long as it did against overwhelming odds. 60 seconds. And if I agree to your terms, then I'll go down there and convince them to surrender peacefully. The prisoners will be released through proper diplomatic channels. Everyone goes home alive. 45 seconds. How do I know you can deliver on that promise?" The human was already moving toward the access ladder leading to the bay floor. Because unlike governments and councils and political entities, individual promises still mean something to people like us. 30 seconds. Kethmore made his choice. "Done. I'll contact the council and frame it as a prisoner exchange negotiation." "You have my word as an officer." The human paused at the ladder. "Your word as an officer. Not as a representative of the hegemony. My personal word." "Good enough." She dropped through the access hatch with fluid grace, landing silently behind the security forces' barricades. The Rangers had just breached the final door to the detention center when she stepped into the open. "Void Rangers," she called out in perfect Alteran battle cant. "Hold position. Negotiation in progress." The 3 figures froze, their weapons still trained on security forces. Through their helmet communicators, rapid exchanges in their native language buzzed back and forth. The lead ranger's voice carried clearly through external speakers. "Identify yourself, human. Instructor Phoenix. Proxima Cross-Training Initiative. Authorization code Sunset 777. A longer pause. Then, incredibly, the lead ranger began to laugh. The sound was bitter, tired, but genuine. Phoenix. Of course it would be Phoenix. The ranger pulled off his helmet, revealing the weathered features of someone who'd aged decades in the past 15 years. I suppose you're here to stop us. I'm here to keep you alive, Commander Velthar. Though I admit the two objectives might conflict. Velthar studied her scarred helmet with recognition. Still wearing your memorial, I see. How many of our marks are on there? 3. Your Void Walker specialist who held the reactor station at Kepler. Your demolitions expert who brought down the orbital platform at Arcturus. And, she paused, your predecessor, Commander Gorak 9, who died covering the civilian evacuation at New Altara. You remember their names. I remember all the names. The standoff continued, but something had shifted in the atmosphere. The Rangers' weapons remained ready, but their attention was focused entirely on the conversation between their commander and the human. The prisoners, Velthar said, we're not leaving without them. You don't have to. General Keth Moore has agreed to release them through diplomatic channels. No more work camps, no more persecution. Just transport to a neutral world where they can live in peace. And in return, you surrender yourselves for processing. No more raiding, no more attacks on civilian shipping. The hegemony acknowledges the Alteran people as a protected refugee population. Velthar's expression twisted with conflicted emotions. You're asking us to trust the same government that tried to exterminate us. I'm asking you to trust me, the human corrected. The same instructor who taught you that sometimes the best victory is the one where everyone survives to fight another day. And if they betray this agreement, the human's voice carried absolute certainty. Then you'll have 47 extinct warrior cultures to keep you company. The commander considered this for a long moment. Around them, security forces waited with weapons drawn, but nobody moved. The entire station seemed to hold its breath. You trained us too well, Phoenix. We could fight our way out of this. You could try. Some of you might even make it. The human stepped closer, lowering her voice. But those 17 civilians in the detention center, they wouldn't survive the crossfire, and you know it. Velthar closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the weight of command and survival and loss was visible in their depths. Stand down, he ordered his rangers. Weapons on safe. Prepare for surrender protocols. Commander? One of his subordinates questioned. The war is over, Velthar said quietly. It's been over for 15 years. Time we started acting like it. The Rangers began lowering their weapons with obvious reluctance. Security forces maintained their positions but eased back slightly. One condition, Velthar added, looking directly at the human. I want to speak with the prisoners before any transfers take place. They have the right to choose their own fate. Agreed. What followed was the strangest prisoner processing in Vex Prime Station's history. The 17 Alteran civilians were brought to a neutral meeting area where there would be rescuers explained the negotiated settlement. Old and young alike listened with tears streaming down their faces as Velthar described the terms. An elderly female stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. Commander, we thought, we believed everyone was gone. That we were the last. Not the last, Velthar replied gently. We just scattered. There are others out there building new lives on frontier worlds. This agreement means you can join them safely. And you. What happens to the Rangers? We'll face judgment for our actions since the war ended. But Phoenix has guaranteed fair treatment under military law rather than summary execution. The elderly Alteran turned to study the human with curious eyes. Phoenix, you're the one from the stories. The human who fought at Proxima Ridge, among other places. You killed our greatest warriors, destroyed our military, brought our civilization to its knees. There was no accusation in her voice, just statement of fact. Yes. And now you're saving our survivors. Why? The human was quiet for several heartbeats, because the war is over, and because someone needs to make sure it stays that way. The transfer proceeded smoothly over the following hours. The Alteran civilians were provided with transport to a neutral colony world where other survivors had established a small community. The Rangers submitted to detention but were treated as prisoners of war rather than common criminals. General Keth Moore found the human at an observation deck as the transport ships departed. The Council has ratified the agreement. The Alteran people are now officially under hegemony protection as a displaced population. Good. They're also offering you a position as special liaison for refugee affairs, substantial compensation, full diplomatic immunity. The human chuckled, a sound like grinding metal. The politicians, they never learn, do they? Is that a refusal? That's a recognition that some things can't be bought or bargained for. She gestured toward the departing ships. They'll be safe now, that's what matters. What will you do now? Your mission here is complete. The human touched one of the deeper scars on her helmet thoughtfully. There are other survivors out there, other promises to keep, other stories that need remembering. The galaxy is a dangerous place for someone traveling alone. General, I've been traveling alone since the war ended. The galaxy hasn't managed to kill me yet. Keth Moore watched her walk away, noting the steady confidence in her stride. Phoenix, he called after her. She paused but didn't turn around. That helmet of yours. 47 different cultures, you said. How many more before you're finished? The human's response carried across the observation deck with quiet finality, as many as it takes. She disappeared into the crowd, just another figure among the traders and travelers. But those who looked closely might have noticed the respectful space that opened around her path, the instinctive recognition that some battles were too important to forget. The cracked helmet caught the station's artificial light one final time before vanishing into the maze of corridors. Each scar told a story, each mark honored the fallen, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, other survivors waited for a promise to be kept. The war was over. The remembering had just begun,